Thank you very much, Tommy. There's one or two households in the church family that are in the midst of birthday season. Birthdays spells birthday cake. Birthday cake spells candles. Can you imagine how foolish it would be to take a birthday cake candle and say, "Let me help you see the sun"? It'd be a very foolish thing to do. Someone has said of preaching Revelation 5 that it's a bit like holding a candle up to the sun. It's kind of pointless exercise. What possibly good can you do? Because there is the sun. That is the chapter of Revelation 5. Why try and preach on it? We're trusting and praying, as we have prayed, that there is some helpfulness in opening up this chapter to see the wonder of it, although it's a bit of a formidable task in one sense, like holding a candle up to the sun. But we'll carry on the basis we trust the Lord to help us, and that we will see great things in this vision. What is your favourite background music? If you're just idling around, perhaps in the kitchen, in the car, what radio station do you go for your background music? It often depends, doesn't it, on the mood that we're in, how the day is going. You're kind of settled Radio 4 person or Radio 2 person or Talk Sport or Heart FM or Classic FM. What's your background music for idling around? It's been suggested that in our lives generally, we all live with a certain kind of background music. That's to say, an underlying mood or tone or feel, which then determines how you are in life, how you behave, how you live, your attitudes, and those sorts of things. Is there something that you take comfort from thinking about again and again? As if to say, at least I've got ... Or at least she likes me, or he thinks I'm all right, or at least I can always ... Your sort of default background music that somehow gives you some kind of comfort. What Revelation 5 is doing in one sense is to give us the background music for our lives which most pleases God. That's to say, godly background music, the theme tune that goes on throughout everything and in everything. If you've got it in front of you, let's have a look. 4 and 5 go together very much. Last week, chapter 4, there was one main feature of the vision. I hope you saw it, heard it, got it. The throne. Revelation chapter 4 was about the throne. That was the main feature. I want to walk through the chapter 5 vision as it continues to see 4 features, but there's a main feature, and the main feature of the vision in 5, and as we go on 6 and 7 as well, is the scroll. Where the throne of chapter 4 stands for God is in control, the scroll of chapter 5 onwards stands for God has a plan. The scroll comes up in the Bible. If we were to go back to books like Ezekiel, the Old Testament prophet, he saw visions, and they're picked up a lot in the book of Revelation. He sees a scroll. And for Ezekiel, it's a scroll which is all about the judgment of God. As he sees it, there's lament and mourning and woe. And as the scroll is unrolled in the book of Revelation, it is too the judgment of God, but also the salvation of God's people. In his plan, there is both judgment and salvation. And it's the plan he has for the last days. That is, between Jesus' ascension and his return, the time that we're in now. And that's what the scroll is that John sees. Just to have a look at some more of the detail, we'll come to it. I saw in the right hand of him who sat on the throne a scroll with writing on both sides and sealed with 7 seals. Writing on both sides, that means it's the complete plan of God, the totality of his plan. And sealed with 7 seals, well, that means it's a very important, authoritative document. And because there are 7 seals, not just one, it's the most important. If you need to open this, if you're going to open this and see inside, you need the most authority there is. There were strong winds this week, weren't there, on Thursday, particularly a southerly wind, 32 miles per hour apparently. And I looked out at the sea. There was a boat, not this boat, but a littler boat than this, being slightly thrown about on the waves in the strong kind of wind that there was. And chapter 4 of Revelation is as if to reassure people in the boat that there is someone who's in control. And chapter 5 is as if to add to that and say it's not just that God is in control, just about holding things together, but that actually he has a plan. He's got an action plan, a way forward. He knows where he's going. And that's what the scroll stands for here. God has his plan. It's not just struggling and managing to be in control just about, but he's got a way forward, a direction, something he is aiming for, a purpose. Do you see, though, that there is a problem in verses 2 and 3? Do you see what the problem is in verses 2 and 3? And I saw a mighty angel proclaiming in a loud voice, "Who is worthy to break the seals and open the scroll?" But no one in heaven or on earth or under the earth could open the scroll or even look inside it. It's this agonizing moment where there's this plan of God's, a plan we'd all say amen to. We want justice to come, we want salvation to come, but there's no one who's fit enough to execute the plan, to carry it out. No one has that authority. Someone described it like this: like a great new ship on a slipway, God's plan stands poised, waiting for someone to cut the ribbon and throw the bottle of champagne and launch history on its final voyage. It's like that at this point in the vision. There's a plan. That's good. Hooray. No one can do it. No one is found who can do that. You imagine living in a world where there's a great sense of justice, but there's no hope of ever getting it. There's no hope that the people who are actually in the right will be proved to be in the right. That's never going to happen. Can you imagine living in a world like that? Imagine no relief from suffering and death and pain. Imagine longing for relief, but knowing that it's not going to come. Can you imagine a world like that? It's no wonder, verse 4, John bursts into tears. It's a really strong expression in the original. It's guts moved that he cries, "I wept and wept because no one was found who was worthy to open the scroll and look inside." Not just revealing it, but carrying it out. No one was found who could do that. It's the horror, verse 4, of a world that is stuck in hopelessness, longing for justice, longing for rescue. But I'm afraid it's not possible. Think of that in the world as mankind tries to sort ourselves out. All the mankind's attempts to solve disease and sickness and death, they're just kind of temporary things. Nothing works forever. We want to rescue ourselves. We try and rescue ourselves from all sorts of things, from old age and from disease, from deception. All those attempts don't last. So there's a plan to judge evil and rescue people. That's exactly what's needed. But it seems at verse 4 there is no one who is found who's authoritative enough, who has the power to bring about that plan. Until verse 5, we're sort of artificially stalling at verse 4 because there is verse 5, and the next feature of the vision is the lion. And the lion stands, as it says in verse 5, for Jesus Christ having triumphed. That is, he's carried out the plan. Just look at verse 5. One of the elders said to me, "Do not weep. See, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has triumphed. He is able to open the scrolls and its 7 seals." Two Old Testament pictures, one from Genesis as Jacob is on his deathbed. He prophesies about his sons and he talks about Judah and says, he's the special one. Think of a lion when you think of Judah. Strong, powerful, he'll bring about God's will. And then the Root of David, Isaiah 11. Isaiah spoke of one who would come in the line of David, but the Root of David somehow before David as well. Both those pictures fulfilled in Jesus Christ. The only one who can put the plan into action. And he's triumphed. He's done it. Just what was needed. The strong figure of Jesus, the powerful figure of Jesus, the mighty one over all God's enemies. It's just the right picture. Lion. And we were rewatching some Planet Earth series. We're so behind watching things. We were rewatching the Planet Earth series just recently. And there's no doubt, as you get the kind of jungle bits, and well, not the jungle bits, the sort of desert bits, who's in charge. And the lion is top. I was going to say top dog, top lion. The lion is in charge. And I gather that in the plains of Africa where the lions live, the lion is the only animal that can afford to eat slowly. Apparently other wild animals like hyenas and cheetahs, they have to eat quickly because the lion might come and take away their meal. But for the lion, apparently, there's no one above him, no one threatens him, and therefore he can eat slowly. And he just eats his meal as slowly as he likes because he's absolutely top of the tree. The lion is the most powerful and the most respected. And Jesus is the Lion of the tribe of Judah who has won and has been victorious. He's carried out the plan. Yes, it's all a bit visiony. It's all a bit out there and up there. How's he done that? Because all John has heard so far is this elder telling him. And the elder has said, the Lion of the tribe of Judah has triumphed. And so John, as you'd expect, he looks so that he can see the lion, so he can see the long mane and the powerful legs and perhaps roaring like the beginning of those films to show who's really in charge. He wants to see this lion, this majestic feat of power and might, which is why verse 6 is such an incredible shock, because he turns and then he sees a lamb. We expect great strength and power and might, and we see an animal of weakness. And even more shockingly, it's a dead lamb. A lamb as had been slain, killed. And you think that's a bit disappointing. Is God's plan really going to come about? Let's look on. Look at the detail of verse 6, because the lamb is Jesus who was slain. Do you see his body position? Well, if he's slain, perhaps lying down. No, he's standing. His death goes on somehow with a lasting effect. This is the resurrected lamb. And standing where? In the center of the throne. Not that the Father has left the throne, but that this lamb, together with the Father, rules and receives glory like the Father. That's how triumph comes, by this lamb being slain. This is how the plan's been enacted and carried out. The lamb has been slain. The death of Jesus is where you get victory over sin and Satan and death itself. The death of Jesus is how judgment comes to the world. It's how rescue comes to the world for God's people. We've got a book at home, sort of Christmassy type book, Days That Change the World, subtitled The 50 Defining Events of World History. And there's a whole range of days. You could probably handpick some favorite days that you think would go down as world-changing days. There's the assassination of Julius Caesar. I don't know if you thought of that one. The defeat of the Spanish Armada. This is just a selection. Isaac Newton's first day at university. US independence. The atomic bomb on Hiroshima. 9/11 and all sorts of other days in between. All very significant days. But do you see what Revelation is saying? The turning point of history. The top of the trump day which turns history is the day that Jesus died. That's the day when the whole plan of God is set in motion. And I think that's really important as you read the whole book of Revelation. There are people who get excited about the book of Revelation for chasing and seeking out the day by which they think some future day, and they have lots of lovely labels for it, Armageddon and so on, which just comes once in the book of Revelation, not more. And they look forward to a day that's going to be cataclysmic and changing everything. Revelation says, no, that day's already happened. The death of Jesus' day is that day. In terms of God's plan for the universe, that has been kicked into action on that first Good Friday. It's as if, as one writer put it, there's a script for world events that's been written in eternity. And the day Jesus died, the action began. Salvation and judgment for those who would come to him. And the death of Jesus, we see, deals with the sin of God's people. The death of Jesus deals with the power of all of God's enemies. The death of Jesus guarantees future victory. You may have heard it paralleled with various moments of various wars, but it's like D-Day in the Second World War. The Allies invade mainland Europe to begin a long march to Berlin, and that's a great turning point, the great turning point in the war. Not final victory, lots of fighting still to be done, but the guarantee, the assurance, The end was in sight. And it is odd, isn't it? The lion achieves the victory by being the lamb. And that is the paradox of the Christian faith, isn't it? The victory that comes through sacrifice. The power that is evident in weakness. The kingship and power of Jesus as the lion includes service and sacrifice as the lamb. They go together. I hope you're enjoying the avalanche of Christmas advertising that you'll be sort of sitting in or swimming in various forms. Everything reminding us of Christmas coming. And we will remember, as we've mentioned, the coming of Jesus as the baby born in the manger. And if we preach the gospel faithfully, we will also get, I trust, to explain the death of Jesus on the cross. Don't let's forget that through those events, Jesus remains the triumphant lion. Even on the cross, he is the triumphant lion. Could have wiped out his enemies in one breath. He is still the triumphant lion. One writer remembers how he watched the film of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I don't know if you've seen it. And he just describes that the reason for him that Aslan's death was so moving is not that he couldn't fight back, but that he could have fought back and didn't. And what makes Jesus' death so amazing and merciful is not that he couldn't fight back, but that he chose not to in order to redeem his people. I read of a great quote from the film Schindler's List this week. Power is when you can do anything to anybody and you don't. And so our triumphant lion, who is the slain lamb. The more of a conqueror he is, the more astounding it is that he should conquer by humiliation and suffering and death and coming low and being weak. And so we're to be people who make much of Jesus and who make much of Jesus' death. The Apostle Paul didn't proclaim that we proclaim Christ and leave it at that. He said we proclaim Christ and him crucified. I confess to thinking of the cross myself, and I just warn us not to do the same, to think of the cross as something we hear about at the beginning and then move on to bigger and better things. And Revelation would say, hang on, hear the angels. They praise Jesus who was slain, who died. And we must beware, I think, of craving something new or something contemporary that will really cut it, or something powerful in the eyes of the world. Beware of underplaying the cross or forgetting it. Never tolerate low thoughts of the cross, said Spurgeon. And one vicar in a place not so far away said, dead is the soul that ceases to be amazed at the love of God in Christ on the cross. So those three of the features, the scroll, the lion, the lamb, and the rest of the vision in chapter 5, I think I'm hopefully not too far off in summarizing it in a final feature. It is simply to say the response, which is the singing. The singing to the Lamb. It stands for Jesus being glorified. This is the last, 8 to 14 is praise and worship and singing. It's very, very loud because of who is singing as you look down. And at the same time, it's very, very beautiful because of what they're singing about. Because all they say and all they sing is about the Lamb and about the Lamb who was slain. And I just said don't try and draw anything, but if you could depict 8 to 14, it seems like it's a sort of theatre in the round with 3 circles of praise. There's a circle 1, a circle 2, circle 3. We'll just go through them. Circle 1, if you like, verses 8 to 10. This is the living creatures and the 24 elders. They fall down before the Lamb. And you see in verse 8, each one has a harp. They're into praising Jesus, and they're holding golden bowls full of incense. It's the prayers of the saints. I don't know all the details of that, but do you see how encouraging it is? Our prayers do get through. And their song, you can see Jesus is glorified for doing various things. Verse 9. You are worthy to take the scroll and to open its seals because you were slain. And here's what that being slain does. With your blood, you purchased men for God from every tribe and language and people and nation. They glorified Jesus for the crucifixion because that's how people are purchased, bought by God for himself at the cost of his own blood. We have a member of our family who's very into vintage cars, and you can tell a vintage car person because they know all the details of a particular car. Slightly strange way. This isn't a vintage car, but it's an old car, a Morris Minor. But they know all the detail. They know the history of the car. They know the sort of problems that it will have, the problems that it's currently got. They know the work that needs doing. Sort of strange knowledge all about the car. And if you imagine someone coming along to the owner of this car in this garden field and saying, "I'd love to buy that Morris Minor, please." And the owner says, "Well, how much are you prepared to pay?" And this enthusiast says, "Well, I'll pay £10,000 for it." And the owner can't believe it. He says, "Why are you going to pay so much?" And this enthusiast just says, "Well, I love Morris Minors. It's my life's outlook to collect them and restore them and to love them. I just love Morris Minors." Because there's a man who knows the past problems of the car. They know what needs doing to the car. They know what even will probably go wrong with it in the future. But even knowing all that, they'll pay the money because they love Morris Minors. They collect them. It's their life's work. When Jesus purchased people for God, it's the same. He knows all our past problems and mistakes. He knows what needs doing. He even knows where it'll all go wrong in the future. And knowing all that, he chose to redeem us and buy us at the cost of his own blood because he loves us. And he's into gathering his people for himself. But look at verse 9 again, because we're not all Morris Minors, if that worries you. Purchased men for God from every tribe and language and people and nation. The collection of God's people is hugely varied, multi-ethnic, multilingual, multicultural. It's not wrong, of course, to think of Jesus' death as being personally for us, for me. It is that. But it's a tiny speck in a global operation. That is God's plan. Every tribe, language, people, and nation. St. Michael's Primary School in Bournemouth has, I think, in it represented 51 cultures, something like that. We're living in an area that's very like that, isn't it? It doesn't make a school like that off limits for speaking about Jesus. Multicultural is what Jesus is into. We get a taste of it even here, don't we, on a Sunday? People from Brazil and Saudi Arabia and Greece and Bulgaria, England, Korea, France, Austria, South Africa, Hungary, and all the places I've forgotten. How come all those nationalities can gather in one place happily? Because of the death of Jesus. Because once someone is purchased by Jesus, their primary allegiance is no longer their nationality or their culture. We can laugh at cultural differences and how we speak and all that, but we're suddenly joined by a greater primary allegiance that is Jesus Christ. He's glorified for redeeming people of all kinds. Just look at verse 10 again, because there's other reasons. He's also made people into servants of God. You've made them, verse 10, to be a kingdom and priests to serve our God. So whichever country you're from, whichever language you speak, those trusting Christ have privileged access to God, just like the priests of the Old Testament, and their life's calling now, their common life's calling, is to serve God and not themselves. And the last line of verse 10, Jesus has raised people to reign with God himself. Extraordinary thought. In some sense, that is true now, in a spiritual sense, an invisible way. Christians are raised to Christ, to the right hand of God, to join him in ruling the world. We don't see that now, but it's begun. And one day it'll be clear to see. And all that is why Jesus is praised and glorified and worthy. Verses 9 and 10. That's the first circle of praise. If you were here last week in Revelation chapter 4, you may have noticed that that chapter could have been acceptable to all kinds of religions. That actually, for our Jewish friends and for our Muslim friends, they could perhaps agree that there is indeed a throne, and that's good. That God is on his throne, and that's good. That he's the center of everything, and yes, we agree with that. It's when you add Revelation 5, you see, it's not just God on his throne, it's the slain Lamb, Jesus Christ, who is standing in the center of the throne. And if you know of people, or perhaps if you're here this morning, you're from another religion in terms of background, and you're thinking about the claims of the Christian faith, Revelation 4 and 5 together answers a lot of questions, doesn't it, about religions and God. How do I give God central place in my life? How do I worship and honor God in my life? It is by worshiping and honoring the crucified Christ. How do I give God the central place in my life? I give the slain lamb, Jesus, the center place of my life. You want relationship and connection with God Almighty? You need relationship and connection with Jesus Christ who died. And wonderfully, anyone can know that, wherever you're from, as you turn to him from your sin, as you trust him and his death for forgiveness. Jesus is glorified for all that. So that's circle 1. Let's just wrap up by looking at circles 2 and 3. Do you see verses 11 and 12? Circle of praise number 2. The volume's about to increase. Verse 11. Then I looked and heard the voice of many angels, numbering thousands upon thousands and 10,000 times 10,000s. Don't get a calculator out. That just means there's too many to count. And they praise Jesus, it says, verse 12, in loud voices. And it's beautiful because of what they say. Worthy is the Lamb who was slain to receive power, wealth, wisdom, strength, honor, glory, praise. The words that were used of God in chapter 4, Jesus gets those and more. And then circle of praise number 3, verses 13 and 14, in case anyone's left out. Here is the adoration, the glorifying of God on his throne and the Lamb together by every living being. Verse 13, then I heard every creature in heaven and on earth and under the earth and on the sea and all that is in them. No one left out. Singing, to him who sits on the throne and to the Lamb be praise, honor, glory, power forever and ever. Mind-blowing. You can't depict it, you can't understand it really. A picture of universal worship of the risen Jesus who died. Is glorifying the Jesus who died the background music of your life? Are you living and singing in line with this reality? Is it the dominant theme? So that no sacrifice is too great to make for him, no comfort worth prizing above him. So that as Christians walking through a messy world, in one sense we're helped to keep going, aren't we, as we come and see, chapter 4, the throne of God. But also as we come to chapter 5, as we come and, if you like, sing to the Lamb who was slain, we are helped to keep going. So that we reverence him while others rubbish him. And we trust his blood for our forgiveness while others turn from disgust. And we stand with him in his humiliation as others trample over him. At the moment, chapter 5 is an invisible reality. One day it will be visible. And that means we glorify Jesus who died even now. As one preacher put it, the Jesus who bled and died in your place must be to you the sun in your sky. That is the brightest, strongest, warmest reference point for all things, for life and for death, because worthy is the Lamb who was slain. Let's have a few moments of quiet. You want to keep the passage open before we sing. The ex-pars are going to go to the hall for beginning to think through this together as well. And then in a moment, Sam will come up and introduce the final song.